Here we go. Warren, how are you?
Just jumping right into those personal questions right off the bat there. Oh well.
I know, right? I can't remember who the guest was. We had a guest on. It was earlier this year, and I asked her because we do like a little prep before we start recording, and I say, there's no like stump to chump questions. Everything should be laid back and conversational. And I asked her how she was doing, and she's like, "I thought you said there would be no hard questions." I was like, "Oh, my bad."
I had the right answer here, actually. I was planning for this the whole day, and then you went and you asked me, and I just totally forgot what it was that I was going to say here. So, thanks for that.
Yeah, that's why I'm here. Joining us back after a long break, and she just dropped offline. Well, I'll just foreshadow it. Jillian is back as a co-host on the show, but she's having audio issues, so she'll be joining us later in the episode. But then also joining us today as our special guest, Brian Vallelunga from Doppler. Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. Great to be here.
Dude, I'm excited to have you. Looking forward to this conversation because we're going to be talking about secrets management, which, man, there's so many different ways to deal with that. So I'm excited to hear what your take on that is. But before we get into that, could you give our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got to this point in your life?
Yeah, sure. So, I've always been a founder at heart. Doppler's, I think, startup number 8 or 9. It's been quite a journey. A lot of companies that now looking back probably feel more like projects. But a lot of failures along the way. So all I'd say is just don't give up. But I think for me, where Doppler really got started was I was working at Uber, and I was working on a side project at the time while I was at Uber in my free time. And it was a crypto machine learning marketplace, kind of like all the buzzwords in one. And I could not
Funding was guaranteed, right?
You would think that customers were guaranteed, but turns out I was just a little too early, and none of that was guaranteed at all. If anything, it was really freaking hard to get it off the ground. I felt like pushing a boulder up a hill. You move 1 foot forward and slip 5 feet back from exhaustion. It just sucked. And which is funny because like now there's a company today that just like is enormously successful doing like 99% of what we did. But that's just how it works. Like you got to time it correctly, and we didn't. But yeah, I was working on that for a long time, and I was just getting frustrated. And so I realized at some point I was never going to be able to get this thing off the ground. And so I started looking at the problems I was facing while running it and managing environment variables, API keys, database URLs, and other sensitive information that typically is used to like configure an application. Like I kept struggling with. It felt really weird to share it with a contractor at one point in time. It's like, oh, are they going to walk away with my crypto keys that I can't like really change, and that all the customers are relying on us to keep securely? And then like we dropped crypto at one point, and we were using like Stripe for payment processing, and we had the Stripe production key and staging, the stage 1 on prod, and it took us a month to realize why we weren't doing any transactions. So like the whole month, we were up and operational and could not do a transaction. And it took us so long to figure that out. It was just like so many of these like face palm moments where it's like, damn, that sucked. And so I go back to this in San Francisco to this dinner that had a whole bunch of founders and developers. And I'm like, hey, am I a shitty engineer or is the world broken? I just can't tell anymore. You tell me. It's a real fucking problem. And they were like, yeah, this is a real problem. We're all struggling with it too. And that's what kind of got us started. And after that, we started building the MVP, which took a couple weeks. And on the 4th week, we got some set of customers, and then we were off to the races.
Right on. I mean, that's a quick turnaround to be onboarding customers on your 4th week.
Oh yeah, we were like, speed is the only thing that gives us a permission to survive here. Because if not, we're going to get slaughtered. And so we just moved incredibly quickly. There were many days with no sleep. I mean, Doppler we were the first customer of our own product before we even had a dashboard and a UI. We would just only use it with the API. And whenever I needed to change secrets, I would literally go into the database and edit the secrets before the encryption step. So it's like,
right on. That's awesome. So just to put things in context, you kind of hinted to it. but let's clarify what we mean by secrets. You mentioned, API keys, database URLs, passwords, obviously. What kind of things fall into the scope of secrets management?
Yeah, this is a great question. I generally recommend it's anything that configures the application. And I know that can go even to a little bit of extreme. Like some people on the call could be like, what about my port? Is my port really a secret? And my answer here would be yes. And the reason why is because if you have to start making a decision about what's a secret and what's not, then you could be wrong. And the one time you're wrong, that could lead to the company dying or some like crazy event happening. So instead, I say my view is anytime you're configuring an application with a variable of some type, an API key or port or a logging statement, whatever it is, treat all of it the same and treat it all as the most sensitive thing possible. That way you're kind of offloading this decision making. And you're saying, okay, we're just going to do the most secure thing by default. And so we're reducing our chances of a bad event happening by every engineer now kind of like randomly deciding what's a secret and what's not.
That's a good point, because I think that adds to a lot of the complexity I've had managing secrets in the past, is defining, okay, we do our config variables over here, but then our secrets are over here. And you've just, in hindsight, now that you've said that, I just doubled my workload for really no real good reason.
And usually they end up being like two completely different systems. And so now it's even harder to track of like which one went in which system. It's not like it's like there's like a branching point that you like can like track that and have a review around it. And so a lot of times now you're just hoping and praying every engineer in the company kind of just makes the right decision at all times, which like we're all humans. We're most like at some point in time, someone is going to make a mistake. The problem is that mistake could cost the company big time and all of its users.
Yeah.
So you bring up a really important point there. I think is not really worth diving into for a second. So I really like this topic because I actually have a conference talk that I've been doing for a couple of years now, specifically about teaching about secrets management and all the different strategies out there. And there's like quite a few of them. Secrets Manager, the cloud providers have key management services. There's like open source vaults and whatnot. And the sad story is the only real strategy that like works in theory is something like bring your own keys, where things are secured by default. And the number of providers out there that support that, like I know we do at Authorist, like let our customers bring their own keys, but like the number of customers out there that are working with a provider, even like something as important as Stripe or even some of the cloud providers, they don't support that. Like you can't bring your own keys to any of those critical systems. It's sort of ridiculous that this is the world we live in of only bad options are available.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I would say like where we really now, I agree with you that it's really, we're living in a world of bad options. Doppler tries to, and obviously I'm biased because founded Doppler, I'll just call that out. But like, I think that just so anyone knows, but I do think that like you can get to a pretty good state. And then I would say where the world's going in a second, which I can talk about, is like the ideal state. But at least at Doppler, we went through a lot of iterations. Like we rebuilt the product from scratch, like 3 times. And what we realized is that you're never going to be able to get developer adoption unless you make vegetables taste like candy, and vegetables being the security, candy being the developer productivity. Developers are never going to use it.
I like that the developers are children in this scenario because it just really
I'm
not.
I'm going to go up to I still eat my vegetables, so. But yeah, you got to. It's really around like are you taking energy from them or are you giving them energy in a way, right? Like developers want to stay in flow state. They want to be super productive. And if you can help them be more productive, if you can give them like a tailwind, then they will love your tool and they'll use it regardless of the security benefits. But if you give them headwinds, well, they're going to run away from you because they don't like that, understandably. And so for us, that was our trick to making it a tool that developers truly love. So the company gets security benefits is give them about 2 hours a week of productivity gains. And there's a whole host of ways we do that. We don't have to get into that on this call, but like that was the fundamental reason that I think Doppler has become somewhat successful in helping developers want to manage their secrets better. It's not about forcing them to, it's about getting them to want to do it. And then I think I mentioned before of like where it's going in the ideal state. We're moving to this world of like identity-based identity-based authentication. And so the idea here is like with like we have something like passkey where like you can scan your fingerprint or scan your face and get into another system with just your email address and that like fingerprint or that face ID. And that's called passkey. It's getting rolled out across like all these major sites today. That's going to start happening with secrets like API keys. Instead of having this API key, you'll have like this identity. And so the fact that you're on your laptop or in an AWS cluster, you'll automatically be authenticated to Stripe in the future. And that's like a really powerful thing. And my guess is it'll be like a little bit difficult to set up without like a proper secrets manager like Doppler. But once it is set up, it'll be seamless. Like you're just in the machine and it just works. You're automatically authenticated. And there's nothing else you need to do. And there's now no worry about actually losing this secret, which can cause a breach or anything like that. It'll just be secure by default.
Yeah, for sure. So that scenario sounds to me a lot like, or like very similar to the OpenID Connect platform. We use that a lot with our GitHub integration. So the way that works for anyone who's not familiar with it is GitHub, when your GitHub action runs, it sends an authenticated request to your AWS environment. AWS validates that request and then issues back a temporary set of credentials tied to a specific role that has been set up. So now your GitHub action has permissions inside your AWS account to do only the things that are permitted by that role and only within the time frame set by those keys that were issued to it. And it is a pain in the ass to set up, but like once it's set up, it's so seamless and smooth, and you never have to lie to your security guys and say, "Oh yeah, we rotated the keys." Absolutely.
I really like that you brought this up, actually, because the canonical name that you called it was OpenID Connect, which isn't wrong. And the like GitHub and AWS jumped on OIDC as the acronym for it for making this work. And that's not what OpenID Connect is at all, but that's what all of these providers are calling it. The canonical term, ridiculously, is actually known as workload identities, and they're sourced from some trusted location. So in this case, you're having your AWS account trust GitHub as a source, and then your workload is getting its own temporary identity, which can authenticate to your cloud provider. And yeah, for sure, this is the dream come true of bring your own keys. Workload identities being able to be passed from wherever you're running to whatever the third-party application is that you're integrating with, without ever needing to do anything else other than potentially sharing a public key exchange, because I think that's still going to need to be a manual step by everyone involved.
How does that line up with the future as you see it, Brian?
It's very close. I think we need some middle player. And I think Doppler is going to be that middle player that kind of acts as like the network highway for everyone. So I'll give you an example. Let's just say you're in AWS. We're going to make it super seamless to be connected from AWS to Doppler. And so anytime you're in AWS, you're automatically authenticated to Doppler with all the right roles, permissions, and all that stuff. And then you're going to also want that, because you're in Doppler, to be connected automatically to Stripe, to Twilio, to your database, to the 10,000 other services you're using. And so now you're going to get this beautiful world where you don't have to configure all these individual relationships painfully in AWS. Instead, you'll set up one relationship with Doppler, and then Doppler will kind of give you a seamless way to like manage the rest. And so you kind of get this like one-to-one and then one-to-many, right? So the fact that you're in AWS, you're now authenticated to Doppler, which means you're authenticated to Stripe. And it all just kind of like works seamlessly in the background. Like Doppler kind of like fades away, and it's like just operating completely in the shadows and giving you that authentication to all the services that you care about. And that's kind of like the world we see ourselves playing in the future.
Right on. What are
switchboard? You know, did anybody like ever use party lines or anything when they were a kid, and you'd have to call a switchboard operator?
Yeah.
And they would direct you to where you needed to go. And then in the background, you know, like the nosy neighbor would be listening in on just everybody's call and would know everything that was going on.
That nosy neighbor was my grandma. She was always on there listening.
Yeah, I had some aunts like that too. They always knew what was up. And that's Doppler. Doppler knows what's up too.
We try as hard as possible not to know what's up.
So I guess that's not the endorsement you're looking for, huh?
Right. Nice save, Brian. Nice save.
I think in like reality, what will end up happening is like we will like offload the like we'll give them because we'll have the relationship with Stripe or any of these services. It'll all just get encrypted at the end of the day, and we'll just try to make sure that we set up the encryption in a way that we can't possibly like read the output of. Because like for everyone's benefit, we don't want to be able to see that data.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest problem today is that those products, those applications that you really want to have protected have some of the worst security involved ever. Like you use Stripe as an example, and it's not the worst one there is, but you can't even I can't even get SSO to work with Stripe. Like they don't support it anymore. Like literally Stripe does not support SSO. And I'm just like, how? Like, why not? Like, I want that to be integrated into my SIEM system. I want to be able to authenticate there and have two-factor auth through whatever provider I'm utilizing. And it doesn't support it. So like, they don't even support that baseline. So I have very little faith that in the very near future, Stripe will support workload identities to be able to prove that. But I mean, if we get there, that would be great. So far, the number of providers that really support this is just absolutely minuscule.
So I have two thoughts around that because we put a lot of time into thinking about like how do we get the community to. My gut read on what's going to happen is eventually there's going to be an open protocol that everyone can like adhere to that's like pretty easy to use. Probably there'll be like SDKs in all the popular languages. And then some company or a band of secrets management companies are going to put out a leaderboard and they're going to show all the companies that do support it. It'll be kind of like the SSO tax website. And you kind of just like want to be on that list or don't want to be on that list, depending on how it's structured. And my hope is that like that will create enough peer pressure. And then on top of that, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that like as AI gets more and more sophisticated and can go from like being a co-pilot to like a full-blown engineer, like AI engineers. And I'm not talking about humans that are using AI to engineer. I'm talking about an AI that is fully capable of being an engineer. Those AI agents are going to want identity-based authentication, and they will push aggressively for it. And I bet that's going to like those two things together will probably lead over time to like all the big players eventually like doing this just because they have to.
I love your optimism. Like it's just so great. I mean, because like today we see so many people putting credentials in plain text, let alone whatever else we're going to call a secret. So getting them to, go down a different path is a huge challenge there. And the other problem is like there is a bit of a standard already around the providers where they can use it. I think everyone could stand up any sort of open ID, but it doesn't give them a lot of like, it doesn't give them money. Like it doesn't help the businesses grow to support that as an option unless some bigger players says, yeah, we like, if you want us to use you, you have to support this. And I think the great example of that is you brought up SSO tax, which I think does the wrong thing. I feel like it's positive reinforcement for all these companies that do the wrong thing. I see this leaderboard of all these companies, and now I read that name. And is there something known in psychology as called preferential attachment? I see this company listed there, and I forget why. Like, I don't remember SSO tax. I just remember the name. And then months later, I got a call from one of their terrible salespeople trying to harass me on my personal phone number saying, hey, do you want to buy our product? But I heard that company name before. So now I'm tempted to actually buy their product, even though the reason I know about them is because they were listed on a site that says they did the wrong thing. We see the same thing happen with vulnerabilities and data leaks. You learn about companies because they had a data leak, and that just actually enforces how great they must be, because then they send out those emails saying, oh, we're committed to security, we're going to change things. And that gives you some confidence in this particular company. So I think there's a special message that has to be sent that actually does the right thing. Having a group of standards can work, but if the companies haven't taken it on themselves to actually implement these, I don't see magically that it's going to happen in the next 10 years.
Maybe another way to I mean, I used to think the same thing about passkeys, but now it's getting rolled out. But on the flip side also, this could be a place for like where compliance comes in. Like they added to the compliance bodies of like, if you issue out secrets, you have to support these methods.
So let's take a quick step back and talk about like, what are some of the other common strategies that you've seen for managing secrets, just to help people put into perspective or like recognize themselves as owners of this problem, even though they may not recognize themselves as that group yet?
Yeah. So typically the way I see it is they're coming from a couple different worlds. One is they're using something called an env file, or like a plain piece of text file that has a whole bunch of secrets on it. That's bad for a number of reasons. One, those secrets are unencrypted on disk, so like they're very easy to like steal. Two, they are now shared in insecure ways, like Slack and email. Again, another breach point that can happen. And three, they may need to be coordinated. Like imagine if you have a Word doc and I have a Word doc, and everyone else on the team has the same Word doc, and we're all editing in real time before Google Docs or Notion, and we have to all keep it in sync. That's like quite hard. So another thing we see is like they're only using cloud providers, which generally works for production, but then they're using like env files for development. And like where the problem really gets bad is like they can't answer these like fundamental 4 questions. The first question is like, do I know where all my secrets are? Because you cannot possibly protect your secrets unless you know where all of them are.
Yeah,
do I have the
point?
Right? Do I have the ability to like access control these secrets? Because if you can't put permissions around them, again, you can't protect them. Very hard to do that when everyone's just sharing files back and forth. There's no real permission model there.
Right.
3, do I have logging and auditing around every action that's taken, including reads? Right. Do I know every time someone has read a secret from development to production and everything in between? You'd be surprised how many times production credentials end up in a development environment. Right. So you need to track development too. Like you'll see this all the time where like developers like, oh, production's having an outage. I'm just going to like create myself a prod.env file and test production locally real quick.
Right.
Okay, now you got prod secrets on your laptop. What are you going to do? Like, and then the last one is when you do have a data breach because something went bad, can you stop it very quickly? And I mean very quickly in the orders of like minutes. Like if you think about how fast data can leave your system, right? Like data can leave your system in like gigabits per second, right? From AWS. Well, if that's the case, couple of minutes of a data breach is actually like a really, really big deal at this point. Hours is like disastrous. And so if you can't answer those 4 questions confidently, not like, oh yeah, I can write on a piece of paper, but like I am extremely confident. I bet my job and my life on answering these questions confidently, you have a problem. And now it's on you to fix it.
I like that. That's pretty clear cut. I will not go on record answering those questions. Throw that out.
No, definitely not betting my life there. Like I think maybe that was a little bit much for me.
I mean, since I guess that leaves me, and I run a technology company that focuses on providing login and access control for applications that our customers write, and so I feel like secrets is super important for both us and our customers there, and we're pretty extensively using complex crypto and things like key management services, KMS, and AWS, and some of the other cloud providers to do that at location, that site-based encryption there. And I definitely don't trust a lot of people to get that even close to correct.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really, really hard. Especially if you're like building. I found that if like, again, you gotta get the productivity part. Like if you got to make it super simple and easy to use where there's no foot gun moments, you can't shoot yourself in the foot. The default easy path has to be the right path. And that's probably like the hardest part that I found with building this. It's like at the end of the day, at least for us, it didn't feel like building the tool that was secure was a hard part. It was like at our foundational level of like the infrastructure layer, but building it so that the end user experience for the developer being secure by default, that part was actually really hard to get right. Because like every developer has like a different system in mind. And so like now you have to like support a very wide variety of different setups. And they all have to be secure by default. And the most secure thing has to be the default thing. And so like talking a little bit about like what a solution would look like, even if you're not going to use Doppler, you don't have to use Doppler. That's not my job here is to like sell you guys on that. My job here is to sell you guys on the problem, and then you guys should go solve the problem so we don't keep having data breaches, because the number's only rising and it's rising fast. It's like a high growth stock right now.
Right.
What you need is a service that centralizes or a system that centralizes all your secrets in one place that's encrypted. Super, super important. You need a system that does not encourage secrets to be on disk. So you're reading, and if you're reading from the environment, you immediately clean that up from the environment after your frameworks and libraries have booted up. You need a service that has access controls and auditing built in with a really strong audit story there. Ideally, can also push those logs into a centralized logging platform like Datadog, Splunk, and Sumo Logic, so you can do more robust analysis on it, set up alerting. You need the ability to automatically push the secrets when they change into your infrastructure. So there can't be a human step involved or like, let me file a Jira ticket and wait 3 weeks for this ticket to get closed, because your code's going to get rolled out automatically. So by default, even without the security problems, you have an outage guaranteed because you have this race condition of a human filing and fulfilling a ticket versus GitHub automatically rolling that out to AWS or your infrastructure, right? They're like, one's going to move a lot faster than the other in the order of like seconds versus like days and weeks. So you have to have it automatically rolled out just like your code is. And ideally, it has to be rolled out before your code does, so your code has it to consume when it boots up. And the last thing is you got to be able to rotate your credentials either automatically or manually very quickly. If you have a data breach, you cannot learn how to firefight at the same time. That's too slow. You have to have like your procedures down. You have to know what buttons you're going to click, and you're going to have to know how fast it takes you. And if a data breach happens and you're going to take minutes to hours to solve this problem, you are in a really, really bad spot. So you can do those things. Whatever tool you use, you'll be in good shape. Warren, you think I missed anything?
Not at all, actually. But the thing that came to mind is like, I'm wondering about the corollaries, like, what other solutions are there that are out there where you're playing in the same space? And I'm trying to understand like whether or not it's closer to, say, a secrets manager that one of the cloud providers offer, or OpenBow or HashiCorp's Vault are, say, your competitors, or whether or not there's something specific here.
Yeah. So with the secrets managers from the cloud providers, those are actually partners of ours. So almost all of our customers are using AWS Secrets Manager and Doppler, and kind of like the mental model there is kind of similar to GitHub or GitLab, where developer pulls their code down, changes it on their laptop, then pushes it back up, and then when it's ready to get released to production, then GitHub would then push it to AWS, which has its own repository store, and that gets deployed. Doppler does the same thing. We'll allow you to pull those secrets down, change them, and then when you're ready to push them up into production, we will push it to AWS Secrets Manager or AWS Parameter Store or whatever you're using on Azure or GCP, and then that will then push it into your infrastructure. And so it's kind of like the same model there. So we are very closely partnered with the cloud providers and most infrastructure companies. We support I think 40 different infrastructure companies right now. And then on the even Kubernetes we support, which isn't a company, it's a open source initiative, but we support that pretty extensively too. And then on OpenBow, I would say we're more closely competitive, but I would argue that it really solves different problems than we do. We're looking specifically to solve secrets regarding API keys, database URLs, and other things that configure your application. I would say OpenBow is more like a generic key store, and you can put anything sensitive in it, like a photo of a passport or a social security number or some medical records, not things that are deeply connected to your application and your infrastructure. I would say they are missing a lot of the layers, going back to the make vegetables taste like candy. They squarely have the vegetables, but there is no candy involved. And without the candy involved, you're not really solving the problem. And so I would say it's kind of like Dropbox versus Amazon S3. They both do storage, but one is here's some APIs, go figure out what to do with it. The other is a whole end-to-end experience that makes it super easy to securely store, manage secrets. And that's where I think we fit in. So while they're competitive, I'd say we're almost operating in different markets. So we don't really see it as hyper competitive.
That makes sense. One of the things you keep coming back to that I really like, it really resonates with me, is making the vegetables taste like candy and making the right thing the default thing. I just think that works so well because your target customers, not just yours for Doppler, but mine at my organization, I support the engineering teams. I try to put in just guardrails so that they can do whatever they need to do to get their job done. But then I've got guardrails in place so they don't accidentally do something that they didn't want to do. And so by default, they end up doing the right thing, even when they don't know what the right thing is. And I think that's so important to get. to get that right, to have adoption so that you don't have to add this extra layer of technical expertise and competency on your developers to do the job that you hired them for.
100% agree. Like I would assume like almost every developer you're going to hire is coming with positive intent. They want to do a great job. They want the company to be secure. They want it to be successful. But a lot of times, if you force the question on that, if you force them to answer the question of like, is this secure? Is this not? What's the best way to secure this? They may not get to the right answer just because they don't have that expertise. And so it's important to kind of like abstract that all away. And developers love abstraction. They love SDKs and frameworks. This is just another one that just equals security, right? So yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think one thing we haven't chatted about that is worth calling out is like, why should we care? Like, why is everyone on the call? Why should they care about keeping these secrets secure? And I know we've talked a lot about data breaches for companies, but a lot of times for me, at least, it feels like the company has a data breach and they get a slap on the wrist, right? They get some fine that they can pay with like 1 day worth of revenue. They maybe get a bad press article that turns into a good press article later in their minds, as Warren was talking about earlier, because now they remember the name. But like, what is the actual real impact here? Because that doesn't sound like a lot of negatives right there. That almost sounds like not that bad. And I think the real risk is actually to the users. Like it's so easy to forget that every time that we talk about like gigabytes or terabytes of data, we're talking about usually people's data, like real people, your customers. And they are trusting you to keep their data private, like to keep their private data private. And when that breach happens, you're breaching their trust because that private data becomes public. And there's real consequences to that. I actually have a real personal story that scared the shit out of me. I just moved to Austin, for anyone who cares, and I took my mom out to some barbecue. And while we were there, I got this call. And the call, it was from someone who claimed to be at the Texas Customs and Borders. And they call me and they say, hey, you're being federally investigated. We found a package that has illegal drugs and money in it. And you cannot hang up from this phone call. Everything's being recorded and it will be used against you in a court of law. And I was like, oh shit, this is the day my life just falls apart. Like, I legitimately thought I was fucked that day. Am I allowed to say that? I hope I am. You guys can edit. And
one of us in this group continuously drops F-bombs. I'm not going to call that person out.
Yeah, we never should. But they started asking me all these questions about like work, like, have you been at this address? Have you bought these things? Like that kind of stuff, like stuff that you'd feel like only the government would know, like really only the government would know. And like this went on for like 40 minutes where they were just like asking me questions that I was validating myself on. And I was with my mom and I were both freaking out. And at some point we bring on the company lawyers to like really make sure like I get I probably should have brought them on earlier, but I was scared. And I just felt so real. And it was only until like an hour and 30 minutes in when we all caught them slip up on something. And it was like my lawyer started pressing them pretty hard. And at some point they got frustrated and their accent kicked in. And they went from a nice Texas accent to like some other accent that I was like, you are not from like America. And at that point we realized we were getting scammed. But they were only able to get to that point of trust because of all the data that had been breached in previous data breaches. My data has been in like 10 data breaches or so, like including Equifax. And so they just had this rich history to lean on to validate who they are as like an authority. And I trusted that for like an hour and a half. And like, I have security training. I run a cybersecurity company. I can imagine my mom, my sister, anyone else who has not had security training, like actually go the entire 10 miles and give them everything. And they wake up tomorrow with like a huge amount of social security problems and like their bank accounts drained because they now know everything. And like that can happen to real people all the time. And that's the real cost that we pay when we mess up and we have a data breach.
That's a great point. Because like you mentioned, from a corporate level, it's almost a net positive to get a data breach, because the fine that you pay actually turned out to just be like really cheap marketing is the way it comes out. But like when you tie it back to and think about like your mom or your sister or people that you know, and you can make it personal like that, that's actually like, it feels like good incentive to take this seriously.
So I think there's a couple of things there that are definitely worth repeating. The first one.
The first one's Brian. What was your social security number again?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's out there. Just go around to
I
one
just
of those.
wanted to point out real quick, like the feds are going to come to your door, not call you.
Yeah,
Although that would freak me the hell out, and I don't know that I would consider that on the phone if I just got a call like that. But for anybody else, if this is a scam that's going on, I'm pretty sure they're just going to come. They're going to come get you.
I know that now.
Right? Yeah.
Lesson
Jillian's
learned.
so on point here. Yeah, like just as soon as the worse a call is that you get, no matter what it is, just hang up first. That's the number one thing you've got to do. If you it doesn't matter what happens, you're not going to get penalized for hanging up the phone. I mean, there's no way. And that's the whole point. They try to keep you on the line because as soon as you hang up, it's actually over for them. The number of times they have to call back will be a problem. So for sure, just do that. And if they don't call back, then no problem. And if they do, then you can continue it from there if you're so worried. If it's so critical for them to figure out what's going on, they for sure would call back. So that's certainly one of them. But on the cost for companies, there is a huge aspect here so my CEO actually did a talk I think last year about the ROI on security. And she joked that the ROI actually stands for return on incident. Because it's so beneficial to actually have this happen for you. And the thing is that it really depends on where you're at. So companies in the United States, in Russia and China get attacked the most. It doesn't matter how big you are, how many customers you have, it doesn't matter your scale or your size, you will for sure get attacked. And without these practices in place, you will for sure get breached. The other thing that's really interesting is there's a lot of countries that just don't care about punishing you. So the amount of fines that you get because of say GDPR, you can actually go look it up. They're incredibly small, like sub 100,000 in most cases for massive incidents. There was one recently where the company did get sued out of business though. So that's funny. And the other thing is that, so it's good. I felt great that, someone did something wrong and they really took the brunt of the punishment there. The really interesting thing here is being a company in Switzerland is there's no, professional, there's no punishment from the government for companies from corporate level. If we perform or have a security breach that's a result of executive negligence, there's up to personal fines the government will charge you with. And there could be other legal repercussions as well. And that's just so ridiculous. And if you work in ITAR in the United States or in any NATO country, that's also personal fine. It's up $10 million and 10 years in jail for having perpetrated sharing sensitive data that is regulated. So it's not even like the company is potentially at fault there. They don't care. The company for sure doesn't care. But you as an individual, there actually could be real repercussions for you.
Yep, absolutely. We share this with sometimes our customers all the time of it's real negligence if you don't manage your secrets. You can't just look away, right? Because again, every single time someone signs up for your website or does something, they're trusting you. And that trust is basically broken if you don't actually manage the keys to your digital kingdom. It's hey, here are hackers, take the keys. That's what you're basically saying if you don't protect them.
Fair point. I think another thing that probably is an additional challenge to this is the level of effort required to get from where I'm at today in secrets management to the ideal world that we're talking about here. Because the question number one you asked is, do you know where all your secrets are? Some of the places I've worked in the past, that could be a 3 to 6 month project just to answer that question. And so how do you get executive buy-in to put time and resources towards that?
It's hard. I think one of the first things you can do that's pretty easy is there's a bunch of open source secret scanners. Trufflehog is one. Doppler will have one at some point, I'm sure. And GitGuardian's another. And you can just put that in the code base and you can have it set up so it never emits back out. So that whatever your findings are, whatever your code is, it will not go to Trufflehog or GitGuardian. But you can just get a report and just put that as a check in every repository as a commit check, right? So before I can even push to GitHub, I'm going to do a check to scan my code for secrets. And all of a sudden, if you can't push to production anymore because of that check, you're probably going to start pulling secrets out of code real quickly. And you're going to always want to stay in the state of a green check mark, i.e. there's no secrets found. And that's like one first way, I think, to like really move the needle there that is basically free. And it takes a couple lines of code to implement. It's really, really quick.
Yeah. And I guess from there, it comes down to like a campaigning issue where you start campaigning for support to get this as a prioritized project.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's actually something interesting here that could be really helpful because so we talked about workload identities and there being a burden of responsibility on the API provider, whoever they are, to make some changes. The one that actually helped us a lot at Authris was we automatically revoke found credentials. So if one of our customers leaks those credentials online, we will find those automatically and revoke them immediately. And you may be like, oh, well, you could break someone's production environment. And that for sure is true and has happened. And then we get a support like, oh my God, our production environment is broken. Why did Authris do this to us? And the sad truth is, yeah, I know. Okay. It for sure happens. But the sad truth is that credentials that are found on GitHub take less than 2 minutes to become utilized by a malicious attacker.
Yep.
That's it. 2 minutes. So like, which do you want? Do you want your production to be broken or do you want all your data to be compromised? And if you look at it through the lens of that, it's like, well, you should be thanking us for, stepping in here and doing something. And the scanners are really great that do this.
Yeah.
AWS does that too. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say AWS absolutely revokes your credentials if you put them, say, in GitHub, which I have no personal knowledge of, but I'm willing to.
I just heard from Reddit that happens.
I mean,
out on these streets that I'm on.
It's almost funny though, because there were a couple of people who wanted to do some experiments with leaked AWS credentials, and they were struggling to do them because every time they intentionally leaked their credentials to different places, AWS kept on revoking them. And they're like, no, I want to set up a honeypot.
No, that's not what we're doing here, AWS. Like, get with the program.
We're doing it intentionally. We're actually doing it. And yeah, so like in our emails, we actually say, oh yeah, please let us know if this was like actually intentional. And then we can try to figure out how to somehow exclude this scenario, because at least they know that there's like a solution path here rather than just like automatic credential revocation and then being like, but I really want this to happen. What's going on? My credentials are invalid. Let me go create new ones and release them again to GitHub, right? Like something happened there. I'd like to go through that 5 or 6 times before they learn their lesson.
We've done the exact same thing with Doppler. If there's a Doppler token found, we will automatically revoke it. I think one step we want to get to even closer, though, is being able to have some secure way of scanning your secrets that are in Doppler to see if they've been in a breach. We do something similar today with passwords, where like if you sign up for a Doppler account with a password that's been in a data breach, we actually alert you and we say you have to use a different password. And then if you log in again, and that in that time since creating your account, your password's been in a data breach, we will force you to change the password.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I force people to change it because Google tells me that about my passwords all the time, and I'm like, but I'm supposed to be secure instead of just rotating, like various things that I rotate through for passwords. They don't make me change it, which is a downfall for me.
Password 1, password 2, password 3. Now I've got to remember password 4 as well.
I know, right? What am I going to do?
Use a password manager. Don't remember password. You want like a 50-character long password that you could not possibly remember. That's what you want.
So,
I know.
So you got to be careful there, because I actually had to start keeping a list of all of the websites that told me that I could put a 63-character password, but then when you sign up, but then when you go to enter it, it said it doesn't match because it's secretly truncating some part of
yes.
Whatever. So like it really starts to get annoying when you think that they support something to the level of security standard that you want, and then secretly under the hood they do something different. And I have a list of those companies that I've paid very close attention to.
Maybe that
have you published it?
No, that's still private for the moment.
Come on, don't tease us, Warren. Don't tease us.
I got some good stories here. So one of them would truncate your password down to 20 characters. But for the 2-factor auth, what it would do is it would ask you for your TOTP 6 character code, and append that to the end to make a 26-character password and send that in the password field. So if your password was anywhere above 26 characters, you would just get a wrong answer. But if it was somewhere between 21 and 26, it would cut out part of the TOTP code and it wouldn't work. And then you just wouldn't be able to get in at all. Also, what that does is it tricks your password manager into thinking the TOTP code is part of your password. And every single time I go to the site, it asks me if I should remember that new password update. Please don't do that. Like if you're designing a system, please stop using passwords altogether. Honestly, like we have this off by default for all of our customers. They can't create a password database unless they come and contact us and justify like who their audience is, why they need this, and what sort of rules they're going to put in place. Because it's just so ridiculous in the corporate space. Like federated logins, OIDC, SAML, SSO, all of those are so much better. Please just use one of those, and don't use passwords. Like 86% of all vulnerabilities are the result of password usage. Like SIM card swapping, found in breaches, et cetera, et cetera. Like just please, like passwords are gone. Like they're done. They're over. Like no more passwords.
I think everyone on this call can agree with that.
I don't know. I support a lot of vendors who are still using passwords.
Warren, I don't know that you're like, are you serious about that?
I agree with Warren here. I think passwords should be done. Their time has come. I mean,
I'm just screwing with them.
So my CEO actually has another talk at QCon in November in San Francisco that everyone should go to if you're in the area. And she'll actually be talking about the fact you do need to have like somewhere between 3 and 5 actual passwords in your life, unfortunately. Like, there's no way around that. And you probably should have ones that the Randall Monroe correct horse battery staple, or is it horse battery staple correct? I can never remember the order of the 4 words. And that's sort of the problem. But you don't want to just use a set of words as your password, because now all of the brute force attacks know that up 3 to 5 words could be your password as well. So you got to make some changes in there. And Apple actually has a pretty good strategy for dynamically generating passwords, where they make a bunch of fake words that are consonant vowel sounds that are strung together, so you can sort of remember it and use that instead. So that's pretty clever. But I highly recommend all those things with symbols and whatnot. It's over, honestly. So 3 to 5. If you have more than 5 passwords, you're probably doing something unsafe.
What about my pets' names?
Oh, those are totally in scope. Yeah,
fantastic. I mean, for some, so now you got to tell us on this call, Jillian.
No, I'm not going to do that.
Right? Which pets were those, Jillian?
It could be any pet. It could be pets from here to childhood. I think, isn't that a common security question?
Yeah, what's your first dog's name?
Of your first pet, first car, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know if it's good enough for the security questions. It should be good enough for my passport.
It's pretty good that you brought that up. I'm sure Brian has some opinions on this too. NIST just re-released the new guidelines, the 800.
No, I'm sorry. I do just come on the show and start trouble. I am sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so now it officially says. Now it actually says you shall not force password rotation. We know that's wrong for sure. Secrets are a little bit in the gray area of whether or not forced rotation is required outside of expected data breaches, but. Yeah, for sure. If you are forcing password rotation, now there's a government that is more ahead of where you're at as far as good password hygiene.
Another thing that I would strongly recommend is whenever they're asking for, there's recovery questions of what's your mother's maiden name, or what's the name of your first pet. Don't actually put that. Go and generate a new password and put that in one password. You can have multiple fields outside of the username password. Create another field, call that the name of the question, and then have a typed password there and put in a 60-character password in there.
So
create a fake family.
Yeah.
I got a really long named family.
Right.
So I do have a warning there. So a long time ago, I thought this was a great idea, and I generated this site to actually dynamically generate SHA-256 encoded answers based off of the question. So I don't even need to remember the question. I just copy and paste the question into this generator, and it will generate a SHA hash for me to put there. However, it broke me because I was talking with some customer service experts who would often be on these calls to have to verify security questions. And they for sure were yeah, we do get people with the list. And when they ask you to verify your question, some people for sure just say, oh yeah, it's just some random characters. Like, I don't remember, like, that's what I put there. I put random like, it's not a word. I put random characters there. And like, that gets by having put like a password in the security question. So security questions are over too, but I definitely recommend a real word, definitely a real word, but not the right answer, as Brian said, and to get over this, and just store that in your password manager as well.
Maybe it should be one of those passwords that are like a chain of words together that you can easily remember, like I went to the park or something like that.
Yeah, I got a list of those that don't accept that, because some of them thought they would be really smart and there would be a drop-down menu of the answers that you could pick, because, you know, that's what they wanted to go with. And I'm like, first of all, my right answer isn't even here. Like, it's like, what was your first instrument you played? And I'm like, I couldn't even put the right answer because it's not listed there. So like, I don't know what game you're playing.
Yeah, I'm really curious what, like 10 years from now, what this whole identity space is going to look like, because it's changing. Yeah.
We can definitely take the rest of the time to talk about that, because that's pretty much what I spent all my day thinking about. And I'll say that there is this aspect of passkeys via hardware tokens isn't the future, because it's still too much churn and difficulty and complexity for most people to get right. And something where the passkeys can be shared between multiple devices is probably correct, but not the Google or Apple approach, but something way more secure. And it's coming. There's actually an open standard that allows for passkey transmission between different devices in a secure way. And I think that will be the first step that really helps us there. The next one is the root of trust, like our browsers working for us and making sure that the security tokens, the JWTs, the session keys that we have are device bound and can't be exfiltrated to an attacker and then reused to generate new stuff. And we'll always be stuck in cross-site scripting land, but those actual tokens will now be worthless outside of the original device, because you'll need the device private key in order to sign each request. And we're working on it. It's happening. The right working groups are focused on it, but you know, it's still a thing that end users are not going to see a huge impact in say the next 10 years.
Yeah, and then once it does happen, you're gonna have to like roll it out, which will also be another wave of adoption as well, a slow one.
It's hard to convince those companies that don't have a financial stake in doing the right thing to make a change fundamentally. And so like, I'm really looking forward to whatever impact Doppler can make on the industry to actually convince people to move to workload identity verification for every request, and not just because your customer happened to be someone that was in Germany and had some ridiculous security requirements there, or required a 27K01 or something, or FedRAMP high in order to get those customers on board.
We have some active projects around looking into improving the compliance body so that they are more encompassing of like secure secrets management. And I think when we make some serious progress there, our goal is to like make that more, because once you get into SOC 2, it's a beautiful thing. Like SOC 2, in a way, it's like if one company SOC 2, every company SOC 2. That's kind of how it has to work, because you have a requirement that all your vendors that you use are SOC 2. So that kind of just has like this ripple effect where if all the B2C companies are SOC 2, then every B2B company is SOC 2. And if we can get in SOC 2, I think that's a pretty effective way to roll out what we're looking for. That's the dream, at least, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of work to make that happen.
I love your optimism. I'm just going to repeat that. Like, I just I love the expectation you have there. It's just so great to hear someone who thinks that we can, you know, get down that path and get to success that way. It's awesome.
Maybe it's not purely optimism. I like, at some point I'm just like, this world is a capitalist structure, and like at some point with enough capital and enough resources, anything should be possible. And I'm not saying you like bribe someone. I'm saying more like you just put enough lawyers in the room and you try to navigate this like it's a political machine, and eventually you'll get there. And then the question is, can we just raise enough money where we have the force projection to do that?
So SOC 2, for anyone that doesn't have it, ends up being a write out some policies and prove that you're following them, where compared to actually putting valid security strategies in place. So it's always going to be a race to the bottom here. And I think we're going to see SOC 2 getting cheaper and less valued over time. as more people realize that it is a compliance checkbox. It's checkbox-based security or insurance.
It really is, though.
Rather than actually providing real value. And that's a sort of a sad fact there. And there's really no alternative. Like maybe that's what we need. Maybe we need some sort of non-regulatory body that can verify companies are compliant in performing actual security. And that's sort of hard because that's driven from like the mindset of the founders and the executive team and the leadership, and money trumps security every time.
See, I think SOC 2 is actually pretty great from a standpoint of like, if you're on SOC 2, all your vendors have to, because that just creates this like beautiful effect where the entire industry has some baseline of security. I think there's just like one critical flaw with SOC 2, and that's it's like tax people or like auditors. The auditors are like literal accountants. Those are the people that are setting the policies. I just don't understand how accountants are setting policies around security. It's like completely different fields, right? Like, it'd be like someone who does your taxes is like the one who's saying you should be secure. I'm like, maybe leave it to the security professionals who think about this all day long. If that one change happened, I would bet like the world would be a lot safer of a place.
I mean, I'm totally with you. It evolved from SOC 1 being a CPA auditor verification that they would take actual liability if your finances weren't in check, and then evolved to actually evaluating different parts of your business, reliability, disaster recovery, business continuity in case of a problem. And of course, that falls into, well, how do your IT systems actually work as well? So there's a lot there, but I'm with you. So to put in perspective of we use not vitamins, but pain pills or painkillers as the analogy. I think governments would have to pay companies who were secure. Like if you are secure and you get a certification, I think that if you got paid, that would be a really good driving factor there.
It would have to be enough to really move the needle, because I could even imagine some companies are like, yeah, even $1 million a year probably wouldn't move the needle for me. I don't know. Like maybe it's a percentage. I really do feel like we don't need to pay them though. Like I think SOC 2 is like the requirement that all your vendors are SOC 2 requirement, I think is so powerful already that pretty much the entire industry has adopted it. We just need different people at the helm. Like, and I know where it started. I completely align with you there, but I kind of see it like Kubernetes a little bit. Like that started within Google and it got so big, it got pulled out of Google into its own body that then could manage it from then on. And I'm saying like SOC 2 is the same thing. They created something amazing with SOC 2. Let's pull it out of the accountants and let's have real security people run this thing. And like, let's give it a V2 or maybe a V3. I think that would do a lot of good.
I mean, I love how Will's like, oh, there's so much going on here.
So I heard
a lot with security. I'm very much like, that's somebody else's job. Don't you guys have like an IT provider for that kind of thing? Which I guess, so I am the problem, I suppose, in this conversation, like in general.
Well, maybe that's a good twist though. Like, do you feel like, Jillian, you have some capacity here to cause your company to do something different, or you have flexibility to pull in libraries or other providers to help you support better security?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like for the most part, they tend to rely on the, like the providers and things that they work with. Because I work with primarily data science companies, so they're not like technology companies where they care about the technology in and of itself. So pretty much as little computing as they can do, they will do. Like these guys, like if they could analyze the data from their laptop, that's what they would be doing. So it has to be, like Brian was saying, it has to be a really easy sell. It has to, it has to be the candy, not the vegetables. It has to be, for the most part, something they don't even notice happening. It just kind of like gets bundled into the background. So pretty much anything on, that kind of front, it's not even so much a question for me. I don't ask them, like, I wouldn't ask my clients like, oh, do you want this? I would just go do this, right? I wouldn't say like, oh, do you want for me to keep your credentials off of GitHub? I would just keep their credentials off of GitHub in that scenario. So I do think so. I do think like smaller, IT providers or consultants or, like just engineers in general, especially if you're working for a company where technology is not their focus, you do have a lot of say in the technology stacks that are used. So we just got to sell this to all the developers, right? Is that what we're going for?
And then eventually work our way up the compliance bodies and those committees.
I do have a question about Doppler maybe, and that's like, what is the minimum implementation you can have here? Is it just maybe replacing out the cloud SDKs with Doppler SDKs for interacting with Secret Manager? Is there something else that has to be done in order to sort of start getting the benefit right away? Or is there like a large upfront integration that has to be done to make it effective?
Yeah, great question. Usually depends on the complexity, but of the company that we're working with from their infrastructure standpoint. But I'd say for like a small startup of like Series B and below, they usually get up and operational in like a couple hours. So like they're usually using some cloud provider like AWS, GCP, or Azure, Secrets Manager. We would directly set up a sync or an integration and write directly into that. So you don't need to change your SDKs at all. It's literally just put like a layer on top, which is Doppler. And then they would download our CLI and use that for local development. For much larger companies, it can take in the order of weeks. We've had very few go longer than a week, even like extremely large entities. Like we have like one customer that's like on a 3-year rollout to 125,000 engineers. And even them, it was like a couple weeks to get them like integrated in their infrastructure. And usually it's like just connecting dots. It's like, okay, you're using AWS Secrets Manager here, you're using GitHub workflows here. We're just going to connect all the dots into Doppler. And then from there, we're going to add local development through like the VS Code extension we have, plus the Doppler CLI. And so it's a pretty formulaic approach that's very quick, I would say. And when you set up those integrations, we'll do bulk imports as well. So we try to streamline a lot of it. I'd say where things get a little bit more complex is if we have customers that like to do everything the Terraform way, then we help them kind of like set up all that stuff instead of in the UI, but through Terraform. So you can actually manage pretty much every part of Doppler, and including all the orchestration and workflows that we have in Doppler through Terraform. And I would say that would slow them down a little bit initially, but then speed them up on the long haul when they are like bringing on like tens of thousands of projects.
I like that you really gave credence to that using IAC there does actually slow you down for development. I do think there's a lot of truth there that people don't like to listen to.
Yeah, it's just like a high upfront cost, but then it pays dividends.
There's something here where like the IAC cloud for the cloud providers and whatnot don't always optimize for easy interactions, right? That it's to have it be fixed and maybe work and make it easy to make changes, but not really quick and easy. Whereas your console, your UI, your CLI are optimized for ease of use and getting to the value as quick as possible.
Yeah, I would say that IAC is like, I almost see it as like stability insurance, right? Like it's there to keep you stable and reliable and very predictable, but it's not there for speed. Though you can, once you have achieved stability, it's very easy to boot up new infrastructure with it, which can give you some speed benefits. But for sure, that's usually come at the cost of a lot of upfront investment. So it's like you're paying down that or drawing down all that initial investment over time.
So I know we opened a huge topic by saying we were going to talk about secrets management, and I think we definitely dove into all the different tangents that were related to it. Was there anything on this that you feel like we missed that would have, you think, a huge impact for the audience? Something, maybe some special wisdom there, anything worth sharing?
Yeah, I would say the only thing that we didn't touch on is it's better to start early. I know when you're first starting out, you're building a company, you're all about like, I need to get to product market fit. And then at some point you'll need to think about like, how do I protect the company now that I've achieved product market fit? And what we found is that it's adding security later on, if it's not part of the DNA of the company, just almost never works. Like you'll feel like you're taking all the right actions, but it won't actually give you the security benefit you're looking for, and thus you'll be vulnerable. And so my strongest suggestion would be to use a secrets manager, Doppler or something else, day one. Does not have to be the best solution, but just use something, get used to it, build it as part of the DNA of your company and of your engineering philosophy, and then grow with it over time. And at least there, you're coming from a stable foundation versus one that's cracky as hell that you're trying to layer a building on top of. Because I think it'll save you a lot of headaches and time down the line. And also, I think the right secrets manager, for what it's worth, will make you feel more productive. So Just calling that out there. That's all I got.
Seems fair enough. On that note, should we do some picks?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, cool. Jillian, I'm throwing you under the bus because you've been gone for a while. What did you bring for a pick today? I mean, it's got to be something cool since you've had plenty of time to figure something out.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure for what I was going to pick. I was going to pick Focus. Like, I'm looking out my window. It's spooky season. It's autumn. It's one of the few live action videos before like cell phones that my kids will actually watch. And so that was it. It's Hocus Pocus. Maybe I'll throw Halloween in there too, just in general.
Halloween the movie or the holiday?
No, the holiday. I don't like any of your like, weird horror scary movies, okay? Like Hocus Pocus is as scary as it gets for me.
Right on.
I don't know why you're laughing, Will. Like that Hocus Pocus for sure traumatized me as a child. Like that was not very. I didn't appreciate that experience. That was very troubling, especially where the cat. You know, there's an animal death in the end, and that's always struggling for me.
Oh, that's true. I was okay with Hocus Pocus. The Never-Ending Story, for some reason, is like the kids' movie that really freaked me out. So we can like bond over our shared trauma of 90s movies like another day.
I mean, I actually like Never-Ending Story. A Different World was sufficiently interesting.
I liked back in the day Halloween Town, if you've ever heard of it. It was like a Disney series, a couple movies, but I would say it's great for kids. Got some magic in it, a little scary, but not too scary.
I love all like the kids' Halloween movies and stuff like that. They're so much fun.
They are.
All right, Warren, how about you? What'd you bring for a pick?
I thought for sure you were going to tell me to go first again, which I've just gone so used to. I'm happy to just do it from here on out.
You're going to fall on your sword for us permanently.
Yeah, I'll just admit that. So when you asked me how I was doing, I had the whole episode to actually think about that. And what I came to is, so I guess I sort of have two picks today. The first one is today is like one of the first days of my short little intermittent fasting that I do every quarter, where I just like don't eat any food for 3 to 7 days, and it just makes me feel so much better. There's a bunch of health benefits associated with taking a break from eating, and I feel better usually by the time I'm done. So like sort of like a full cleanse in a way. Highly recommend. There's like no negative health impact at all from doing this. I mean, it's sort of psychological. It's nice to think like, oh, I don't have to eat like all the time. So I really appreciate that. It's so great since I started doing it. And I think my real pick for today is going to be a book, because I always pick a book, I guess, called Drive by Daniel H. Pink, that talks about the truth of what motivates us and how we as humans get motivated and what actually we use to drive our desire of what we work on, what we find enjoyment in. And the one really important learning that I pulled out from the book is that you will always lose happiness in something where you expect a reward for it. So if you really like doing something and then you make that your job and your job pays you to do that thing, you will actually lose motivation to perform that action, which is sort of a sad story, but I think there's a lot of truth in it. When you start associating money with the thing that you're doing.
Yeah, I've seen that happen in my own life, and it's surprising. You're like, oh, damn, I used to enjoy this. What happened? And in retrospect, you're like, oh, I turned it into a job. That's my bad.
You should not monetize your hobbies.
Right.
Just throw that out there as life advice. Just sit down and crochet your scarves or whatever. It doesn't have to make you money.
Right.
I mean, now I feel like there's a story there that I'm going to want to have to hear at some point.
We're going to have to do like a non-DevOps episode at one point just to cover some of these topics we keep bringing up.
I think so.
But Brian, what about you? What'd you bring for a pick?
I got two.
Right.
The first one is Perplexity. It's kind of like the new version of Google. And like, imagine you're trying to like answer a question like, how do I cook steak with an air fryer? And like, instead of Googling that, where you then get a bunch of links you have to go through, it kind of just gives you the answer. So it's like ChatGPT, but with like search capabilities and advanced reasoning built in. There pretty much hasn't been a question that I've thrown it where it failed at. Like it's really good, including like what happened yesterday in the news, like really, really recent stuff. It does a great job of analyzing, and you can ask it like very complex chain of thought questions where like I find a lot of times I'm searching for something and then I'll have a follow-up question. And so now I need to like ask another query into Google. And this is like, it's like almost like a thread of questions. So you can get like every follow-up question has all the context of the first question or the previous questions. So I really love Perplexity. I've completely shifted over to using Perplexity for almost any knowledge-based question of like, how do I do X, or what do I think about this, or what happened in the stock market? Why did this price go up? Whatever it is. The second one is pickleball. I love pickleball. Love it so much. I try to play like 5 days a week, 2 to 3 hours a day. It's hyper addicting. I burn like 1,000 to 1,800 calories a session. So like a really high amount of calories, and it doesn't feel like a workout at all. Like it's probably the first workout sport that I played that I genuinely love doing, and I'm not just like waiting for it to end. So if there's any people like that out there who have like always wanted to get into sports or always wanted to get in the gym, but always felt like it never really connected with them, try pickleball. There's something magical about it. Almost everyone I show it to falls in love with it.
Yeah, I've never played, but I know people who do, and the level of passion amongst the pickleball community is pretty wild.
It's insane. Like, and it's very, it transfers well. Like you catch that bug where you're like, I just got to be playing today. I did not play at all, and I feel guilty. I don't know. The last time I felt this level of passion and drive for something was like building a company. So like, that's usually like a pretty high bar for me. Is like, so strongly recommend.
Right on. Excellent. So I'm going to pick, because we were talking about this before we started recording the episode, the book by William Forstchen, 1 Second After. It's a science fiction novel that talks about the struggles of a community after an EMP or electromagnetic pulse bomb was detonated over the United States. And so that wipes out all of our modern infrastructure. And I just found it to be a fascinating book because of the things that happened that, you don't normally think about. And it was well written and very engaging throughout. So if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely a cool book to read. And I think that brings us to the end of the episode. Brian, thank you so much. It's been great having you on the show. Very insightful, and yeah, crap. Now I got work to do. Thanks, man.
I could help.
Right.
Leaving this episode with a checklist.
Yeah, no kidding. For real. Jillian, it's nice to have you back on the show. Warren, as always, thank you for being here. And Brian, hope to hear from you again. Best of luck with Doppler, and keep in touch.
Will do. Thank you so much.
All right. You bet. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next week.